Gotcha.
Hello everyone, and welcome to my evaluation of the best defensive skills in Monster Hunter World Iceborne. I've been wanting to make this video since the base game because I'm well known for considering defensive skills on my build. One thing I want to make clear is my philosophy of defense in Monster Hunter World. And that philosophy is to take as little of it as you actually need. That's because, like most other players, YouTubers, speedrunners, I strongly agree with mostly focusing your build around damage. You have these monsters, they're big old bullet sponges. If you can flinch them, that'd be nice. If you could part break them, that'd be nice. And the sooner they're dead, the fewer chances they get to kill you and ruin your whole run. So I'm actually very strongly leaning toward damage, but I also acknowledge that typically monsters will specialize in one or two things, and if you can build one or two defensive skills, that fight generally becomes much easier. And one of the problems you don't want to run into is you don't want to lose your match, okay? So like imagine if your match with full damage skills would take 5 minutes, but if you actually lost it, it could take you like 10 minutes, or it could take you 9 minutes, right? Let's say you lost like 4 minutes in. It could take you 9 minutes to get the match done. Well, if one or two defensive skills would have made that fight about 7 minutes, then you're cutting the loss in half, right? The 4 minute loss in half. So that's kind of my philosophy around defense. The goal is to be more survivable and to ensure that you actually finish the run, and this is supposed to save you time. However, if running around like a glass cannon were more effective, I would just run around as a glass cannon all the time, but this is usually not the case. The monsters are difficult enough that they're going to knock you out, right? Especially if you're taking high risks. There's one risk, of course, that I think is higher than all the others, and that's skipping health boost. So guess which skill I'm going to recommend more than others, right? You can probably already guess. But there's actually a lot of defensive skills in the game. We're going to have a chance to talk about all of them. I'm also going to have a list of the overrated defensive skills in the game. So there's a great deal of things to talk about. I think you'll really learn a lot from this video. I think you'll enjoy it a lot. Let's get started with the top 10 list for the best defensive skills in Iceborne. I want to mention that it is ordered by priority, so the number one is my number one choice. After we're done, we'll take a look at the overrated defensive skills list. Starting the list out, in 10th place, we have windproof and earplugs. The problem with windproof and earplugs is that they're fairly expensive to build, and they're really, truly only useful for very specific fights. For example, for Windproof, you'd probably consider bringing it against Lunastra. Windproof 5 will actually protect you from her supernova. The supernova, right, it still lands, but when it lands, it can't wind pressure you anymore, so you easily just farcast out of it. This is one of the best uses of Windproof in the entire game because she's well known for killing the whole team with her supernova, right? She lands, everyone takes a bunch of DOT, and there's like no way to get out of it. And why is that? Because you're stunned the whole time. And what is that stunned? It's actually you're being wind pressured. That's what the stun is. Now with the other skill, earplugs, you run into two cases where you would actually consider earplugs. The first case is you're just getting roared to death by multiple monsters. You know, you got like Savage Devil Joes chasing you, you've got the main monster, and they just keep roaring and roaring and roaring, and you're just not skilled enough to roll through both roars. Well, guess what? When you stand there stunned the whole time, you're actually losing damage when you stand there stunned. And for those who didn't know, you can actually take earplugs to level 4, and it's still really effective at that point, because it's going to cut the stun in half. The other problem you run into is when a monster stuns you with a roar, and then that monster connects an attack on you right afterwards. So you can actually stay stunned long enough for that monster to true combo you, like you can't escape the next move. This is the other case where you consider bringing earplugs, and you kind of have to know which monsters are worth bringing it for that case. And even then you kind of go, well, it'd be nice if I just had some damage reducing skills because they're not going to be roaring the whole game, and I might actually dodge through some of those roars. So the earplugs is expensive, and windproof is expensive as well. Windproof, at least I can say you should consider that for Lunastra. In 9th place, we have Stun Resist. Usually you only become stunned after taking about 2 hits from the monster at least, but sometimes it's 3 hits. Then once you're stunned, you're pretty much dead, because if the monster's still aggroed to you, whatever small amount of health you have left is not going to be enough to absorb the next blow from the monster's attack. The other nice thing about Stun Resist is it's really combating a very universal ailment, right? Think about it. Every monster in the game stuns you. It's not like sleep or paralysis where it's very specific to one monster. They all stun. So it's a very nice skill. The problem with it, the reason it comes down in 9th place is because it's too expensive. You can't afford it. there's so many other really good defensive skills that you can usually fit them on the build, but not stun resist. Now in the base game, one of the rare uses of stun resist is when you're fighting Teostra. Teostra, he deals very high stun damage, often with moves that come out very quickly. Like if he just touches you as he runs by, you're stunned now. He stunned you in 2 moves, and then he's got some very powerful follow-up moves that knock you out. So in the case of fighting Teostra, stun resist is still a skill you'll consider, and then we could get more monsters in the future that are very similar to this, where they just stun you in like 2 very small moves and they can finish you off. That's why this makes the list. Stun resist is decent. Coming in 8th place, we have Guts. Guts is a really nice skill. The way it works is, if you take a large chunk of damage that should have knocked you out, you survive it with 1 HP. You can actually see how much health has to be taken, because there's a little threshold bar on your health bar, so just take a look at that. Yeah, so this was often used in the base game against Arch-Tempered Nergigante and Extreme Behemoth, 2 monsters that hit very hard, and 2 monsters where you really don't have enough lives because they're so good at killing your teammates, right? So we see Guts in the base game was 3 pieces of the Bazaguse set, or you had to take a Lunastra Blaze weapon. In Master Rank, it's very similar. There's also a Guts Charm now, so you can take a Guts Charm, or you can take a Lunastra Blaze weapon. The problem is the Blaze weapons aren't really as good as they used to be, in my opinion. There's still exceptions, 1 or 2, but mostly you don't want to take the Blaze weapons. The other thing is, with the Basil armor, the Basil armor is still not very good. However, you only need 2 pieces of it now, so it's even easier to access. Guts is still really nice. Some other things I should mention: you can still eat for Moxie at the canteen, but nowadays, a lot of people I think are going to be eating for Feline Safeguard. At least one player should be considering eating Feline Safeguard, because this gives your team another life, right? And if you already have the Gut skill because you build for it on your build, then you don't mind missing out on Moxie because you don't need it. See what I'm saying? So it's still a really strong skill in this game. The only thing I'd have to say, the reason it falls down further on the list is because right now, we don't really have any monsters that justify building Guts. Guts is really only used against 1 or 2 monsters, and it probably will still be this way in the future. In other words, for a lot of fights, it's kind of overkill, and it's kind of expensive. Coming up in 7th place, we have the Evade Window skill. I feel like Capcom's kind of fond of giving us this skill with the female full armor sets. Did you notice that? The Ciri armor set that we got from the Witcher DLC gave us Evade Window, and the Claire full armor set also gave us Evade Window. What's the deal with this skill? So basically, it kind of turns you into a Dark Souls character, right? You're able actually to have a very large iframe while rolling, and this, for obvious reasons, is very useful, because if you can just roll through a monster's attack, usually you can punish that monster really well, and it means you didn't take any damage at all. Right? Isn't that what it means? So if you just take no damage at all, you never have to heal, and this saves you a ton of time and allows you to have your attack up time just constantly kind of be there. And this was really a nice skill to take against something like the Behemoth, a monster that you might be fighting over and over again, especially if you're helping friends, or especially if you enjoy the fight, or you're trying to speedrun the fight. So if you have a monster whose moveset you're very familiar with, the sooner you learn the moveset, the sooner Evade Window becomes a very powerful tool, because you're good enough to mostly roll through a lot of the moves already, and the Evade Window makes it so that you definitely roll through all the moves. It's a really powerful skill. The problem is, if you don't have the monster's moveset that well memorized, it's not quite as useful at that point. It's also kind of expensive, right? You need 5 levels of it, and it's a medium decoration slot, which means it's competing with Weakness Exploit and Crit Boost and Agitator. So it's a pretty high cost skill. In 6th place, I've chosen the Wide Range skill. So the Wide Range skill, as we all know, is used for healing teammates. Basically, when you drink a Mega Potion, it affects all the people around you. Now, it's kind of expensive to build for, because you need 5 levels of it. Well, you'd like to have 5 levels of it, and you need to have, probably you'd want 2 levels of Gobbler or Speed Eating, and you probably want to bring the Satiated skill as well, so that you can use lots and lots of heals and buffs on your teammates. That's expensive, but it's also really effective at keeping your teammates alive. Let's say one of your teammates got KO'd, they're stunned, right? They're standing there waiting to die. Well, you're going to keep them alive because you're going to actually heal them up. Or let's say they got grabbed by the Behemoth, you're going to use the Astera Jerky on them to remove the bleed, and then you're going to heal them all the way up. It's just really, really powerful. It stops your teammates from being one-shot. It's one of the best team-based defensive skills in the game. Not to mention, you can also eat a Might Pill. You can also eat a Mega Demon Drug, and this effectively gives your teammates more damage as well. You could also make the case that when your teammates don't have to stop and heal themselves because you healed 3 of them at a time with 1 drink, this is actually a more efficient way to heal your team, and this means that they spend more time with their weapons out attacking the monster rather than healing themselves. So there's all kinds of really nice benefits to using the wide range skill. The problem is players typically don't want to be the healer, right? Like being the healer means you kind of deal a little bit less damage, and it means you're a little bit more responsible for everyone. It also means you go through all of your consumables and they don't. So other than that, I mean, it's just such a powerful skill. I can guarantee you right now, if you were using it in all of your multiplayer fights, you'd win more of your multiplayer fights. They'd almost never end in a loss. Up next, in 5th place, you might not be surprised that I've chosen the elemental resistance skills. You probably have seen me use these a lot. What I like to do, I like to check my build out and see if I can reach like maybe 5 elemental resistance for a specific element, maybe like fire. And then what I'll do at the canteen is I'll eat elemental resist large, and this will bring me up to 20 or over 20. And the reason we like to be over 20 for an elemental resistance is because you become immune to the associated blight, right? So fire has fire blight, water has water blight, thunder has thunder blight, right? You get the idea. And this is not just useful for not having to eat null berries and just avoiding the effects of the blight altogether, you're also getting some of that defense from the fact that your elemental resistance is higher anyways. So if you've ever fought a monster with, let's say, negative elemental resistance to the elemental type that they deal, you know that you easily get 2-shot, and with some of their stronger moves, you can be 1-shot. But when you bring your elemental resistance from, let's say, -5 up to 20, it kind of reverses. Suddenly they need to like 3-shot you, and it's just a huge improvement to the overall fight. Not to mention, the important part about these skills is how cheap they are. They're small decoration slots, and usually you only need to bring like 1 or 2 of them, which is usually the case when I bring them. So if I want to bring fire resistance up to 20, I usually only add like 1 fire resist decoration, maybe 2. See, so it's not just effective, it's also very cheap, which is something I pay very close attention to when it comes to building defensive skills. In 4th place, we have one of the best defensive skills in the game, a skill you're probably overlooking, and that would be the Tool Specialist skill. Why do we like Tool Specialist? Because the mantles in this game are way too strong, which is the whole reason Capcom had to nerf Temporal Mantle, and guess what? Even while nerfed, it's still a really strong mantle, probably the strongest in the game, because it just dodges through moves, right? Then there's the Rocksteady Mantle, and the Rocksteady Mantle just lets you ignore everything, so you can just play really aggressively and keep attacking the monster. You've got the Elemental Resist Mantles, which we know those are all really powerful, and they have a very short recharge time. When you have Tool Specialists, they come back even faster. So if you're fighting like Kieran, you can take Thunder Resist Mantle, and then you can take the Temporal Mantle, and then Tool Specialist just gives you both of those mantles back in time so that you never have to run without a mantle. Well, guess what? In Iceborne, Tool Specialist got even better. And we got the Tool Specialist Secret skill from the Lunastra Master Rank armor, which is just nuts. You can actually bring the Rocksteady Mantle and the Temporal Mantle and have them active most of the hunt. Like when one ends, the other's pretty much ready to become available again. That's how good it is. So I feel like it's just one of those things that people haven't realized how good Tool Specialist Secret is. There are a lot of mantles out there that help you deal more damage, like the Impact Mantle, the Evasion Mantle, and just in general, if you want to feel really powerful, keep your Rocksteady and your Temporal Mantle available all the time. So in terms of defense, Tool Specialist Secret ranks very high. In 3rd place, we have one of my favorite skills in the entire game, Divine Blessing. I've always been a huge fan of this. You know this if you've been following me for a while. I like it because it gives you damage reduction and it scales. So I've been playing video games for a long time, for years. And one of the things I've learned over time, I play a lot of RPGs. One of the things I've learned over time is that we really care about skills that scale. Ones that work by percentages. So like, let's say you wanted to increase your damage. You can increase it by 10 damage, or you can increase it by 10% damage. Well, 10% scales. When you get a stronger weapon, 10% more is going to scale with whatever that new weapon is dealing. It's the same way when it comes to reducing damage. If you have 50% damage reduction, and 100 damage comes in, you reduce that to 50 damage. But then, if another attack comes in, and it's 200 damage, you reduce that by a whopping 100 damage. So the stronger the monsters get, the more powerful a skill like Divine Blessing gets. This is why it's such a good defensive skill. Also, it does the thing we want the most. It just reduces damage, right? There's all these other skills like Windproof and Earplug, Stun Resist, but Divine Blessing deals with the main mechanic that kills you, damage, just reduces it. So it's really powerful, and Divine Blessing Secret is ridiculously good because you only need 2 pieces of the armor set in order to activate it, and those pieces of the armor set are really efficient anyways. So from now on, when we get really difficult fights, really difficult monsters in Iceborne, you better believe that you're going to see the Tool Specialist secret builds and the Divine Blessing secret builds pop out of the woodwork, because those are really going to give the player a lot more survivability without losing very much damage. You do lose damage, you just don't lose that much of it. Alright, last 2 skills. Probably none of you are surprised to find out that I put Fortify in second place. Fortify, I've just always talking about how good it is. The only problem with Fortify is it requires you to die. So if you're a decent player, you really don't need it, you don't run it. But let's say you're fighting a really tough monster and you're trying to solo it. Now Fortify becomes a godlike skill that gives you a huge damage boost and a huge defense boost. That's right, the most difficult fights in the base game, whenever I really wanted to defeat them, I just threw Fortify onto my build, and it costs 1 small decoration slot, which is crazy because it's giving you so much. And finally, to no one's surprise, Health Boost comes in first place. Capcom, when are we going to get Health Boost Secret? I want a health bar that travels across the entire screen and can survive literally everything, including Extreme Behemoth's Ecliptic Meteor. I want to survive 2 of them at the same time. Health Boost is so good, guys, and the reason for it is really uncomplicated. It's something that we've always understood from other RPG games. Basically, the most dangerous thing in the game is getting one-shotted. Health Boost makes it so that you can't get one-shotted. Really simple, right? Even Divine Blessing is not good enough to stop you from getting one-shotted. That's because Divine Blessing doesn't always activate, and I feel like that's exactly why Capcom designed it that way. They didn't want it to be the strongest skill in the game. So with Health Boost, you're guaranteed to survive moves that would have one-shot you, and this is why it has to take first place. It's also fairly cheap, takes 3 small decoration slots. This is still a little tricky because it competes with other skills like attack boost. Generally, it's what it's competing with. But honestly, do you need a little more attack per hit, or do you need to survive one-shotting moves? I always choose to survive one-shotting moves, okay? So Health Boost is my number 1 skill on the list, the best defensive skill in the game. I never play without it. If I was speedrunning, I probably would play without it. That's the only exception. So that's the end of my top 10 defensive skills list. Let me know how you felt about it. Do you disagree with any of my choices? Would you have changed their order maybe? Let me know. Now let's move on to the overrated defense skills. There's a lot of defensive skills in the game, and I'm going to tell you why these skills are not that good. I should also mention that these are not in any particular order. Let's get started. Number 1 is the defense boost skill. So this is a decent skill if you've just started the game and you're terrible at dodging. It's very cheap. It becomes available with very early armor, which is nice, so you can build pieces of armor that have defense boost in it. The problem with defense boost later in the game is A, you should at that point have some mastery of dodging and outspacing skills, so you shouldn't just be taking damage all the time, and B, you really, with decorations and with better armor like the gold Raytheon armor, you have much better defensive options like Health Boost and Divine Blessing. Not to mention, if you've already got Health Boost and Divine Blessing on your build, that would mean that defense boost, it would replace critical eye, and that means giving up a ton of damage. So there's never really room on your build for defense boost. It's just too expensive. After defense boost, let's move on to talking about the terrible recovery skill trifecta. Super recovery, which you get from Val Hazak. That's you gotta have like 2 pieces of the Val set. By the way, I should mention, with the super recovery skill from the Val set, they made it even cheaper to build, and it still sucks. I still wouldn't consider it. You've got recovery speed. This allows you to recover your red health bar sooner, and then you have recovery up, which just means when you heal in larger amounts. I'm not a fan of any of these. Do you want to heal? Just eat a max potion. It fills your health bar out in 1 move. Doesn't even require gobbler, speed eating. It doesn't require any of that. The problem with super recovery on the Val set is just doesn't give you a significant amount of health back at a time, especially when you could just be building health recovery augmentations, right? Then you have recovery speed. Just eat an Astera Jerky or a max potion and recovery up. I don't really use mega potions, just eat max potion. So that's the problem with all 3 of those skills. They can be mitigated to items. What they do can be mitigated. Next up, we have the ailment resistance skills. It does really feel like Capcom's trying to make these more relevant in Iceborne, but I still feel like they're really not required. You could bring them. I think probably the best case would be to bring the paralysis resist against Kieran, because Kieran's an Elder Dragon. He's really deadly. If he paralyzes you, you're in an awful lot of trouble at that point, especially if you're playing by yourself. You're almost guaranteed to get hit by its next move, right? So, but I mean, like, sleep resist against who? Nightshade Paolumu? He's not a threat. You know what I mean? Poison resist, well, just bring antidote, just bring herbal medicine, whatever it is you're going to bring. It's not that big of a deal. So ailment resist is still not where it needs to be. Maybe if it was cheaper, but it's just not. It requires like 3 levels for it to negate the ailment. After that, we have the Evade Extender skill. So don't let me confuse you with this one. I think that Evade Extender is actually decent for like maybe the Gun Lance, maybe the Charge Blade, maybe the Switch Axe, but you actually use it aggressively in order to chase the monster faster, and maybe it's more of an aggressive skill rather than a defensive skill. I feel like if you wanted to be able to survive an incoming attack, you would probably just build Evade Window and iframe through it. If you were going to build a medium decoration slot skill, Evade Extender, I mean, you can use it on your heavy bowgun and try to outspace your opponent. It's just, I rarely find that I actually need this. I've ran a lot of Evade Extender in the past. There's really niche cases, like let's say you're trying to build a bow tank against the Extreme Behemoth. You might bring Evade Extender, you might bring Evade Window in that case, but other than that, it's just this really, I don't know, it just doesn't offer enough. I almost wish it was a small decoration slot rather than a medium one, but it's a medium one, so I just don't use it. Then we have another skill that I really wish was just a little bit better. It's the Heroics skill. Heroics is giving you really a decent damage boost, which is surprising. So you can use a Heroics aggressively. However, Heroics requires you to take damage in order for it to activate. So if you're playing really well, you're just not going to have Heroics active very often. So it's kind of like a self-defeating skill. If you play well, you never use it. You can, there were people who did speedruns with like the feline Heroics from the canteen, and they would intentionally hurt themselves before getting into the fight in order to deal lots of damage. But I just don't see myself ever doing that. It just seems so ridiculous just for a little more damage, you know what I mean? So Heroics needs to be changed. It needs to be buffed or something. I think that maybe if Heroics worked more like Guts, where it's like you would survive, and maybe, I don't know, they just need to decide what it should be. Is it a damage skill or is it a defense skill? It's trying to do both of those things and not very well. There's the Quick Sheath skill. Quick Sheath is a decent skill. We found that Quick Sheath was useful in really niche situations. Like, do you remember Arch-Tempered Nergigante? Arch-Tempered Nergigante was really tough. He would use his dive bomb, and some weapons that didn't have shields, like the bow, they have a longer sheath time, and so you could just barely sheath in time to dive evade his dive bomb. Well, what you could do is build like 1 level of Quick Sheath, and this would pretty much guarantee that you'd get your weapon put away in time for the dive bomb, right? So it wasn't like a totally pointless skill, but you really don't need it in almost any case. Sheathing in this game is very fast. I think Quick Sheath is one of those skills that Capcom should consider buffing. After Quick Sheath, we have the Guard and Guard Up skill. Now, mind you, this could have been on the top 10 list. This is kind of a required skill for a lot of shield weapons, especially lances and gun lances. However, it's more the case that I find them annoyingly necessary. So I feel like the lance and the gun lance have to build all these skill points for something they should already be good at. So that's why Guard and Guard Up actually frustrate me a lot. They make sense if you're playing like a heavy bowgun, or you're playing like a sword and shield, or maybe even the Charge Blade. They kind of make sense because the idea of them making those shields very strong makes sense. But then you have weapons like the Lance and the Gun Lance, which already gave up their walking speed in order to have a big shield, and yet they still have to build Guard and Guard Up. So maybe part of the reason why they made this list is because I don't agree with the weapon balancing in this case. Guard and Guard Up, they're decent skills otherwise. You would consider building them on something like your heavy bowgun. After that, we have Iron Skin. Iron Skin is useful against the Savage Deviljho fight as well as the Acidic Glavenus fight, because what it does is it makes you immune to defense down. The problem is defense is never that big of an issue, and if you're running Divine Blessing Secret, it doesn't matter, right? So rather than building Iron Skin, why wouldn't you just build Divine Blessing Secret? See what I'm saying? So Iron Skin has a problem. Then we have Survival Expert. I thought I'd throw that into the mix. The way Survival Expert works is you interact with something like Spore Puffs and it heals you. It's so ridiculous that they added a skill like this to the game. Maybe if it healed me and gave me like 100 attack, I would use it finally. The problem is it's so conditional. It's an interesting idea, but it's way too conditional. You have to be like near a Spore Puff, which sometimes you are, but I mean like you would have had to have taken damage and been near a Spore Puff and then used that Spore Puff rather than your max potion. It just doesn't make sense to me. You wouldn't do that. You would just use your max potion because you've got a billion of them, right? So there are skills like this in the game, and I feel like Capcom should really just consider the balancing more, because you're talking about a very expensive skill. 3 levels for that. Could you imagine giving up Divine Blessing for Survival Expert? It just doesn't make any sense. Alright, so there's my criticism of the overrated defensive skills, or maybe the sub-meta defensive skills. You already heard my top 10 list. If you enjoyed this video, please consider sharing it. I worked pretty hard on it. And let me know what you'd like to see next. I want to thank all my patrons for supporting my channel, and I want to thank you all for watching. I'll see you guys next time.